Hi, I'm Jim DeFelice.
I'm Rob Neyer, and you are watching the Break It Down show.
This is fantastic. Hopefully we'll get Dan McLaughlin. I know he's trying to make it in, and it'll be exciting if that happens. We're going to talk baseball because today is election day, and we've all had enough of that stuff. So I'm going to be the last person to say the word Trump or election. No more after that. Strict embargo. I'll kick you out of the studio. But I want to talk about baseball because we just had the craziest baseball season that we've probably ever had. And maybe you guys will correct me and remind me of one that I'm missing. But it's been so weird, so crazy. Dodgers win. That's good for me. But the bigger thing is a lot of experimentation, a lot of exceptions. And I think we should definitely talk. But I wanted to ask Jim's question of you, Rob, first. Are you still the commissioner?
I am still the commissioner of the West Coast League, yes. We didn't have a season this year, but somehow they were able to justify keeping me on as commissioner. So we're all pointing toward a full 2021 season.
And do you still need a punishment, Czar? Because I'm glad to lay down the law. Oh, look at that. You got coffee mugs? Oh, I'm going to have to get one of those.
Pete, if I gave you that job, there would be no reason for them to keep paying me, because that is by far the most time-consuming, most difficult, stickiest part of the job.
Gotcha. All right. Well, just keep me in mind when you need something done. I'm glad to come in and be the undersecretary to the assistant commissioner. I don't need a big fancy title. I just want to help. Jim? You're a Yankees fan, Jim. You had to have been hopeful coming in. What are your thoughts overall on the season? Are you shaking your fist or what?
Tampa was a much better team. Tampa was a better team. They had their way with the Yankees. I don't know what they were. Their Yankees kryptonite all through the season. I mean, there were a couple of times when they, you could say, oh well, the Yankees had a lot of injuries when they were playing the Rays, but at the end of the season, the Rays beat them. It's as simple as that.
Rob, we were worried initially about the shortness of the season and the cream maybe not rising, and then with the crazy playoff format with extra games, that again the cream wouldn't rise. But the opposite happened. Is that luck, or what are your thoughts?
I think it was wildly improbable. Not wildly, it was highly improbable that the two teams with the best records would wind up in the World Series, right? I mean, it's unlikely. That rarely happens in a full season. So you certainly wouldn't expect to see it in such a truncated season. It was ultimately a little disappointing for me because I was one of the people who wanted, if we're going to do this, let's have some really crazy stuff happen. And aside from the Astros, who probably were better than their record, aside from the Astros making the playoffs, not really all that much happened that was surprising. You could argue the Marlins, that was pretty surprising. Certainly the Nationals finishing well below 500 was surprising. But, on balance, it wound up not being that crazy a season.
Do you think do you think the shortened season helped any teams? Well, the Rays in particular, because of the way that they kind of use their pitching staff. I mean, I have heard some people say, well, if they had to play the entire year, then those guys they wouldn't have been as sharp going into the playoffs.
That's a really interesting question. What I would say is that I have not studied the issue. It seems highly likely to me that the shortened season helped some teams and hurt others, just based on roster construction. In the Rays' particular case, and again, this might be 180 degrees wrong, but it seems to me that a team that doesn't rely on starting pitchers going deep and relies instead on this sort of flooding the zone with guys who throw 95, I almost think that is more likely to work out over the course of a long season. Because, you lose this guy, well, there's 7 guys right behind him who can come in and do basically the same thing. Now, in the Rays case, they didn't really have that much attrition, unlike the Yankees, who, on balance, the Yankees almost certainly, I think, are a more talented team, but they were not healthy for most of the season, and then they just weren't they didn't play particularly well at just the right time of the season. I would, over 162 games or a best of 7 series, I'd take the Yankees, a healthy Yankees team almost every time. It just didn't work out for them.
It seemed like, maybe I'm wrong, but what do you guys think, that the injuries overall day to day, it seemed like they went down? And it wasn't, maybe because, when that 50th game hits, ligaments just reach their breaking point, and within the next 4 months, I don't know, whatever. But it just seemed like that they were healthier teams overall.
Well, I can't say that for the Yankees, but
yeah,
for the rest of the league, maybe.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, Pete, there was a lot of talk early that there were more injuries than usual. I think that it's a really tricky thing to figure because some players started the season late because of COVID. They had those massive, I don't remember the exact term, I always forget. Taxi squad was the idiomatic description of them. And those, I mean, there were guys who never played higher than A ball who were in the majors this season because the rosters were so fluid. And I think because it was so easy for teams to move guys up and down, even easier than usual, and they also had bigger rosters this season. So, I mean, everything was out of whack roster-wise, and I suspect that I haven't seen anything yet. Somebody's going to do an amazing study on roster use this season and how that impacted injuries and fatigue and all those things. But if nothing else, this season is going to be the greatest fodder for statistical studies that's ever existed in baseball.
Yeah. Okay, will we be able to trust the statistics if it's only a 60 or less game season?
It sort of depends on your definition of trust. Do I believe that the best player over 60 games was necessarily better than the fifth best player, or is better? No, I don't. I think Mike Trout finished 10th in wins above replacement in the American League. I don't think Mike Trout suddenly became the 10th best player in the league. Maybe he was 10th best in the majors. I don't remember. One or the other. Either way, it would be surprising, right? He still had an outstanding season. And of course, when you have a shorter season, the spread between 10 and 1 is going to be much smaller than it would be over the course of 162 games. So I don't know that it really tells it. It's the same thing with the Gold Gloves, which are being announced this week. And they're based completely this year on numbers.
Yeah.
No subjective judgment whatsoever this year. And people are going to, I guarantee you, they already have. They've been complaining about the Gold Gloves because this guy who's always been amazing wasn't even one of the 3 finalists. Well, It might well be that the top 3 guys were like, just throwing some numbers out there, 4.4, 4.2, 4.1, and that 4th guy was 4.0. Okay, the guy who we thought was the best guy in the league. Well, the difference between 4.0 and 4.4 is it's meaningless, essentially, let alone the difference between 4.0 and 4.1. So there are going to be a lot of things like that. You just can't take the rankings seriously. I would look at fundamental skills still and look at what happened in 2019 if you really want to get a full picture of how good somebody is.
In terms of fielding, I'm wondering too, Rob, and we've kind of talked about this before in the past, but I think that there should be an institutional Gold Glove too, like where the team gets it, because and I don't know how you measure it. Maybe you do the fewest amount of steps taken. Like when you've positioned your people perfectly, like we talked before about Andrew Jones, he doesn't have to dive to catch the ball. He's already there.
Right.
He's just got such a big jump, with all the analysis, like what team put their people in the best spot to make the most plays most reliably. That seems like an important. Well, if we're really if we're going to add in the utility player Golden Glove, I think we need to have the guys behind the bench.
I'm going to give that idea my full-throated endorsement. And this might be completely off, but someone just in passing mentioned to me yesterday that they're going to be something about team awards. And I didn't have a chance because it was in the middle of something else to ask him what the hell he was talking about. Okay.
Yeah.
But later I thought, wait a second, are they doing team gold gloves this year? That sounds crazy. They're not really doing that, are they? And I think probably I just misconstrued what he said. But that is a great idea because, especially now, because so much of defense is shifts and positioning, right? And there's a very easy way to, I mean, look, if you could come really close to finding the best fielding team with one really simple measure. There's a stat that maybe Bill James invented it 30 years ago. I don't know for sure. But I know I think he called it defensive efficiency rating. Mm-hmm. And all it is the percentage of batted balls in play that are turned into outs. Right? I mean, anybody can understand that, and which makes it a much better statistic. You might be able to fashion something that worked a little better or was more descriptive, more accurate, but you can't beat that for simplicity. How many outs do we get when they hit the ball? And there's no reason why one team in each league couldn't get a team gold glove. That would be great.
I've always counted steps on. Oh, sorry, Jim. Go ahead.
Well, no, I was going to ask, since it's an interesting idea. Would you do it so, the whole team, or the infield gold gloves, the outfield? How does that? How are you guys building this thing?
Well, again, I don't even know. Well, the actual statistic is purely, it's based on the entire team. You know, we have 100 batted balls. We got 80 outs out of those. And you can give 2 outs for a double play or not. I think different people do it differently, but I probably would. So theoretically, you could have more than 100%, but that in the real world, that wouldn't happen over the course of a season. But yeah, it's really simple, and it's I think the best shorthand measure of team defense. And sure, why not give an award for that?
And I was going to say, I think you really could with StatCast measure how many steps per out.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, and if you have a number of outs that's high and a low number of steps, you're like, this is a very well positioned team.
Right. Well, you could theoretically give an award for the best coaching, right? Because it's the coaching staff or the front office staff that determines where guys should play. And for the most part, all the shifting, that has nothing to do with the players or the manager. It's just it's the front office staff saying we need to shift for these guys over into these spots. And you've probably seen players even have like little things on their wrists that tell them exactly which spot to go to for certain defensive alignments. So yeah, that I'm sure that the teams would love it. They'd finally get some glory for the guys in the front office.
I'm waiting for for them to start using laser pointers to show exactly where they want to position the fielders.
They tried that. The Dodgers got in trouble for that in 2017. They would flash it, and that's why they all take their hat off. It's all in here, and then they put it back on.
I heard a story one time about it. A player who, I wish I could remember the details, but he was playing for a team, and he went to another team, and all of a sudden he had no idea where to go because his previous team, the coaching staff had put little paint markers on the field to tell him where to go for different alignments. And he thought everybody did that.
Yeah, that's funny. I wanted to ask too, what do you guys think about the changes we did have this year? The ghost runner on second base for extra innings, seven inning double headers, all of the different changes, the DH universally. What do you think, Jim? What about those did you like and not like?
I thought well, I guess we'll start with the runner on second. I don't think I didn't like that in a regular game. Let's say you went to the 10th, but I can see the utility, like at some point, like let's say the 12th or whatever. I'm just throwing that number out, because there it does kind of. It did seem to. I thought I would really, really, really hate it. But in a couple of games, it did add a little something else. But this way, if it wasn't exactly starting at the 10th, maybe you'd still have about a tradition. What does Rob think?
I mean, it's difficult for me to separate my feelings as an analyst and as a fan. As an analyst or somebody just like tries to figure out what's better for the game, I think that all those things are fine. That the great majority of fans don't really care one way or the other and are probably happy to have the game shortened a little bit. I would say that maybe my single favorite thing about experiencing baseball as a fan during the regular season anyway are those marathon games that go 15, 16, 17 innings, and I'm listening on my phone in bed at midnight, and it doesn't happen very often, but I have so much fun during those games, and now they're gone. I think Jim, you're probably right. If I'm just trying to look at it analytically, dispassionately, the balance you describe is probably what they would be the best thing for the fans generally, which is, let's just play this thing out. Because most of those games, they end in the 10th or the 11th, right? Very few games get to 12, 13 innings. So if we're going to put this crazy rule in, shouldn't call it a crazy rule. If we're going to put this new rule in, let's just give it a couple extra innings to see if we need it. And most teams carry such huge pitching staffs nowadays that they can absorb an extra inning or two every once in a while. And then in the 12th or the 13th, when the bullpen starts to get emptied out, then maybe we can do this weird stuff. But I don't see any reason to start it in the 10th inning. I agree with you.
I kind of like the old way of doing it, not for the sake of old, but I think it goes to what baseball is, right? It's this struggle. It's not about, yes, there are moments of brilliance, but tomorrow you've got to put a team on the field, and you just use yesterday or tomorrow's starting pitcher because you went 18 innings, or your catcher is. You have to adapt to these trying situations. A really good friend of the show of mine is the DJ for the Dodgers, and even extra inning games impact him because he's got a whole plan on what he's going to play during this homestand, and he just burned through 2 games worth of songs. He's got to adapt to it. I think that stress that is on a team. I think as you look at a season, I don't want to miss out on that. I want to know what happens when you have to go 16 innings in game 1 of a series, followed up by.
You make a good point, and everyone seems to have a vested interest, and this is true in all sports, in making the games less interesting, because then it's easier for them, right? Yeah. Coaches don't like long games, players don't like long games, and I've said this a gazillion times over the years, we don't play the games for the players and the coaches, right, or the front office people. The games are played for the fans. You don't have games without fans. And that's the thing that professional sports generally, but I think baseball in particular, far too often forgets. It's not for them, it's for us. Without us, there's no them.
Well, we could have throw kind of another rule in there. If you get past the 15th inning, then you have to start. Then you can only use players as pitchers who are already on the field. So we could have the left fielder, center. Then it'd really be interesting. That's right. Entertaining.
Yep, absolutely.
I like that a lot. I wanted to ask about the other new things. Universal DH, fellas. Let's talk about that real quick.
Well, I think it makes sense in many ways. I'm not a purist about it. I don't really enjoy watching pitchers hit, but it's sort of a conundrum for me because I do enjoy there being some difference between the two leagues. Yeah. Once that goes away, then why do we even have these names anymore? I realize it's for scheduling to some degree, but if you have interleague play and you have all the same umpires and a DH in both leagues, literally every rule is exactly the same. We've lost something. I think we've lost that variety. But again, having said that, if I were in a National League city, I wouldn't really enjoy watching the pitchers hit at all if that was sort of my main form of entertainment. So I get it. And I think most people agree that it's been inevitable for a long time. Once they made this sort of one season experimental thing, it's pretty much gone. I'd be shocked if we ever saw pitchers hit again.
Well, I think I'm with Rob, or actually maybe even a little more militant. I really, really like the fact that the leagues are different, and that there are different rules, and different strategies. Really, I don't care about the rules as much as the strategies that are employed. It's that I like, and if you have the DH in the American League and the pitcher hitting in the National, then there's more variety, and as Rob says, there's a little difference between the leagues. And don't get me started on interleague play, because worst thing that ever happened to baseball since the White Sox scandal.
And since we're talking about what could be a little bit here too, what if, because we need more contact, right? Because all these 98 plus mile an hour people, what if we grew the DH to 2 positions? Okay, pitcher, and then you get to do one other hitter designated position player. So that way, I don't know, your light hitting shortstop from the Dominican Republic doesn't have to hit 220, or get on base at a percentage below 30. Like, what if we just had a second?
Silly. Now that is just
too far.
out of whack. It just that's crazy. That's
the
crazy
union
talk.
likes it.
Well, the real problem, Pete, if you're trying to accomplish more contact, is that you would just wind up with another guy swinging for the fences, so you wouldn't have more contact.
Okay.
You'd have more runs scored, because that most of the time that second DH would be a better hitter than the guy you replaced by definition, almost. But you wouldn't wind up with more contact. If you want to wind up with more contact, you have to make, at this point, you would have to make a fundamental change to the rules. You would have to either move the mound back, or you would have to drop it by a couple of inches. The other option would be to play around at the strike zone a little bit. These are all options, but nobody in MLB has shown any real interest in exploring any of them yet. The nice thing is MLB has this test bed, the Atlantic League, where they can fool around with some different things and see what happens.
I wonder, that's a good point that Rob's making, but I wonder if, the way baseball goes and, the way that lineups are constructed, if maybe at some point, we start seeing more value put on, on players who are putting the ball, into play, can fight the shift and things, so that guys like DJ LeMahieu, currently on the Yankees, hopefully will still be on the Yankees, maybe their value is actually more, or will become more than we've had, than we think or perceive. I don't know.
I would love to think that's going to happen, but people have been predicting something like that for, well, I don't remember when the strikeout was great jump. Well, yeah, at least. Yeah. I mean, look, back in the early 20s, Ty Cobb was railing against the new style of baseball, and people said, well, scientific baseball is going to come back, and Babe Ruth is just a fad, and clearly that didn't happen. And in fact, generally speaking, home runs and strikeouts have just been going like this ever since then. But with today's pitchers being trained to throw as hard as they throw, and with the hitters being trained to optimize their swings for power, there's no, to this point, there seems to be nobody even has any interest in changing those trends. There's a player, Nick Madrigal, rookie who came up with the White Sox this season and played really well. He got hurt, but then he came back and played well. He's a freak. He hits for a high average and never strikes out. I mean, it's like a throwback to Tony Gwynn or Yogi Berra. You can name lots of names. Well, he doesn't have Berra's power, but I don't think you can train Nick Madrigals. I think he's like a unicorn. He just sort of appears and he's magical, but I don't know that you can make more of him. And all the training that's happening out there in baseball is in the opposite direction. I really think that if you want more contact, you've got to change the structure of the game, the rules of the game, and the players and the coaches just can't fight this tide.
Well, I think the strike zone, I think the strike zone will become, I don't know how you want to phrase it, robotic strike zone, computer strike zone or something. That's going to happen relatively soon. And at that point, maybe we'll have change.
Well, that's a really great point, Jim, because it'd be very difficult to constructively change the strike zone
Hmm.
and train every umpire at the same time to call that new zone. But you're absolutely right. If you automate the strike zone, you can train the players relatively quickly, and the machines got it from day one, right? So I think it's a really good point. That would be the time to do it.
Is the game better with that robotic umpire? Because I know I watched the playoffs, and the games that I saw, the bottom of the strike zone continues to be a problem where the umpire can't get into a position to reliably, they're kind of, I don't want to say they're guessing, but they don't get it right often enough. You'll see a ball that, at least in terms of what we're shown as a strike zone, maybe the upper half of the ball hits it, but it's in the strike zone.
Well, Pete, I'm going to push back a little bit because there's a website called Close Call Sports that analyzes umpires.
Nice.
And they focus pretty precisely on a couple of things. They look at ejections and the situation that led to it, and they look at the umpire's ball and strike calls. And it's actually sort of amazing how good these guys are. Okay. There were a few games where not so great, but there were a number of games in the postseason where the umpire at the end of the game had missed 2, 3, 4 pitches in the entire game. And you're absolutely right. You can't tell just from looking at the box on the TV, right? Because that's a 2-dimensional box. The strike zone is obviously 3-dimensional. The other thing is, and this doesn't happen very often, but sometimes that box is not placed in the right spot relative to the batter's stance. It's really good at getting the horizontal, but the vertical's tough because every batter has a different body and a different stance, right? If you don't set that thing just right, in fact, what Close Call Sports does is they'll do an initial score and then they'll go back and check it later, and it makes some adjustments for where the batter's stance actually was, and usually that makes the umpire, that adds 1 or 2 pitches to his ledger. So those guys are phenomenal for the most part. The younger umpires, I was talking to an umpire last week about this, and a retired umpire, and one of his theory is that the umpires today grew up playing video games. And their eyes were just trained to see things coming real fast and reacting. And that's one of the reasons why these younger umpires, most of them younger umpires, are just incredibly accurate. And think about it too, how hard it is now with the pitchers throwing as hard as they throw.
Right.
And yet the umpires are better than they've ever been, I think.
Yeah, interesting. The ability of an umpire to change a game. Okay, let me ask you this. And I'm asking both of you guys. We have instant replay. It's here to stay. It kind of bugs me that you get to go to your own instant replay to decide if you want to make the call. I think you've got 30 seconds to decide. No external comms. Either you think the call was good or not, and let them sort it on the field. This hocus pocus of getting on the phone. Don't waste our time with that. Let's keep it. The manager has to make the call.
Well, if we have to have instant replay. I mean, because listen, if we really value the fact that we have real umpires making the call, sometimes making mistakes, hopefully being somewhat consistent, then shouldn't everything just depend on the human eye and the spur of the moment?
I guess, Pete, what I would say is that the reason we have video review is because people wound up people weren't willing to put up with as many missed calls as we had. There was a game, I believe it was the 2009 League Championship Series. I wish I could remember who the teams were, Yankees and somebody. And there were 3 calls in one game that were just blatantly missed. When you saw it afterward. Now, one of them was blatantly missed, even if you were just, a seagull flying by 100, 200 feet above. But the other 2 were not that obvious unless you were watching on TV. And you had all of the super slow motion and the digital cameras, and it was clear. So 3 in one game. And if you were to do what you were suggesting, you would still have some of those.
Yeah.
Because you would have to limit the challenges, right? And managers would be afraid to use up challenges unless they were absolutely sure. And what would happen inevitably is you'd have some calls that were missed in big moments that the manager just wasn't sure enough about to challenge. So, I mean, maybe I'm Pollyanna here, but I think they've probably reached just about the right balance. There are a few tweaks you might want to make. The one thing that I think drives people crazy, and I think semi-reasonably, are those plays when the guy's sliding for the base and he gets there in time and then he just comes off like this much and they hold the tag on him and he's out. Well, there's part of me that says, well, that's the rule. I mean, if you don't want to come off, don't slide as hard. But I do understand why that's frustrating for people. And there's probably a way that you could eliminate that call from happening so often. But I think they wound up after a few years at arriving at the right balance.
I think we could easily just have it be, Major League Baseball has someone examining basically every play, and then they just push a red button, say, hold, please. And they go, okay, yep, this play instead of making the whole theater of calling back. I mean, if they're looking at a replay, so is Major League Baseball. Right. Just make the call in advance and just make any play potentially under review. We want to get every play right. We're going to take 30 seconds every now and then to look at it. And then and if we need an extra minute because it's really close, then we'll take that extra minute. But let's get rid of the whole challenge thing and just get the calls right then.
Right.
Yeah, but wouldn't that would they'd need like so many more, they'd need dedicated personnel watching every game.
Creating jobs. Interns. I don't know.
What about the rosters? What do you see? Ask Rob this. What do you see happening with the rosters going forward?
Well,
look into your crystal ball.
Speaking of ways to make the game more interesting, limiting the number of pitchers on the staff would help. Now they've done that, but they haven't done it nearly enough to make a difference. I mean, when you have a team carrying 14 pitchers, that doesn't lead to the game that everyone wants, right? Which is quicker and more balls in play. The more relievers you have, the more pitching changes you're going to have, and the more strikeouts you're going to have. Why do we even allow this to happen? It doesn't make any sense. And again, I think it gets back to making things easier on the managers and the players. The more pitchers you have, the more roster spots you're going to have. Ultimately, the more major leaguers you're going to have, because pitchers get churned in and out of the major leagues more often, right? Than position players. So the more roster spots you devote to pitchers, the more major leaguers you're going to have. Ergo, the more union members you're going to have. Which is why the players are totally fine with 15-man pitching staffs. But it doesn't make for the game that most of us want to watch. So in terms of rosters, and they already expanded the rosters, which was, in my opinion, a big mistake. What happens when you expand the roster? You just get another pitcher.
Yeah.
Right. That's it. It isn't the pinch runner or the pinch hitter who can make the game more interesting at the end. It's just another pitcher. So, look, they've already expanded the rosters. That's not coming back. But one easy move would be to limit the number of pitchers you can carry on the roster to a greater degree than they have done. And it's a shame that they don't seem to be able to figure that out.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think some teams would have, if they could, they just have nine fielders, period.
Sure.
And everybody else would be a pitcher.
That's not far off from what teams are actually doing. I mean, I know I read this year about a game where when a team carried 15 pitchers, well, that only left 11 spots, right? So you have your 9 hitters and you have 2 guys on the bench.
Yeah.
One of
yeah. The Dodgers carried a pinch runner who they basically never used the entire postseason. It just sat there for the most part. But they for sure keep those specialists. What about if we got creative? First off, I love the passed ball to take first base if you can. I love that because if we're going to throw 98 with movement, let's penalize those wild pitches with the runner on first. I love that. But also, what if we put a restrictor plate kind of approach on pitchers and say, hey, you can have 5 triple-digit pitches per game, but if it's faster than 98 more than 6 times, we're going to call that a ball. And look, these guys can absolutely, if they can in-game micro coach, it's an approach. I'm trying to create, because at some point, the tunneling approach of throwing the same pitch on you reach a point of impossible for the hitter to do anything other than swing and guess. You don't like my speed limit, Jim?
Yeah. And who's gonna? I can see the home plate umpire with holding the gun out, right?
Yeah. Well, they'll look at the speed after every pitch anyhow. He's like,
Well, they
nope,
do, but
sorry.
it's some of those are close. Some of those are closer to fiction than fact. But okay.
Well, look, that probably isn't going to get much support, Pete. But I read recently that
he's so diplomatic.
I read recently that the upper limit for fastball speed might be 110, with basically every single young pitcher training to get to that or close to it. The game, as we've come to know it, can't function if everybody's throwing 105 to 110 miles an hour, right? So then you've got to do something. So yes, you need to get creative. It's just a question of which one of those creative choices or which ones we're going to choose. But the game doesn't work at 110. It just doesn't.
I don't know. I've seen a whole bunch of home runs hit off Chapman at 98 miles an hour.
No, it's true.
I don't know what to tell you.
It's not clear yet what the limit is in terms of hitting a fastball, but I got to think that the problem, of course, with hitting 110 is that if you throw 110 and you also throw 88, how do the hitters adjust to those kinds of speeds? I don't know, but I think at 110 the game would be unrecognizable. It'd just be a batter versus pitcher duel. That's it.
What do you guys think of the rule? That a relief pitcher coming in has to simplifying it to face 3 batters.
I love it. I think it was long overdue.
Mm-hmm.
It's just one of a dozen things that I think should be done. But I was glad, and everybody moaned about it and thought it was the end of the world, like they thought a few years ago that an automatic intentional walk was the end of the world. But I mean, after a few games, I barely even noticed.
Yeah.
That was a good rule change. I like that one. And then I like the 3-batter or closing an inning. I like that rule. And I would even go further. Commissioner Pete would say, if you intend to change a pitcher, he needs to be in the dugout, ready to go. Just come out quit wasting time with the damn ceremony,
Yep.
Yeah, like, I'm going to change a pitcher. You're not changing my mind. Well, then bring them with you. I mean, warmed up pitchers stay in the dugout all the time. So there you go. There's what, half an hour per game off from pitching changes according to the playoffs?
Not sure if it's a half an hour, Pete, but it would definitely help.
Yeah.
I love those carts, when they used to have those cool carts.
They brought them back last year. Did you notice that? It was before? Yeah.
That's hilarious.
Most of the pitchers were too proud.
Yeah.
But then we would miss we'd miss the music,
It's true.
Yeah.
Which that adds so much to the game. I mean,
what they ought to do is attach a big speaker on top of the bullpen cart and play the music from there.
Yes. It could be a commercial as well. They could have a sandwich artist on the back payload of the golf cart making sandwiches.
Or, you could have the pitcher has to sing the song or something.
Oh, there you go. Have a karaoke
microphone. You guys ever miss the microphone?
Yeah. I'll be back to see you.
Well, that's something though. What do you think of miking play? What do you think? This has been done for a while now, but what do you think of miking players during the game?
I never get anything out of those interviews ever. Yeah. What are you going to ask a guy that's going to provide any real insight? I mean, I guess 1 out of every 20 times the guy says something, explains a play that happened and which you didn't understand before. But all those gimmicky things. I mean, honestly, I never watch games on TV anymore because they're just so filled with Jim Crackery. Is that the word? That
it is now.
It is now with Jim Crackery that. I just find it intolerable. I mean, the reporters in the stands talking to fans and relatives, all that stuff. I just want to watch the baseball game. And maybe I'm odd in that way. I probably am, but almost all of my baseball now is experienced via the radio broadcast where there's no room for Jim Crackery. It's just these 2 guys are calling the game. That's it. And then I'll, ideally they'll be creating the picture in my mind, but I just find all the rest of it too distracting and annoying to really put up with, including the player interviews.
The player interviews are almost universally terrible. I just, and the pre and post game show. I mean, God bless Frank Thomas and Big Papi and Alex Rodriguez, but I don't want to say anything bad about anybody. I want to celebrate baseball, so I'm going to move.
Okay, good. Don't ask me about them.
I'll ask you, Rob. Tell us what you think about these things.
I'm on the same page as you. Let's just say, here's what I would say about that. Generally speaking, without naming any names, on most of the networks, the players for the marquee pre and post game shows are not chosen for their intellectual acumen. They are chosen for other qualities, and we'll leave it at that, or I'll leave it at that.
Can we have an electric buzzer every time they say the word professional hitter, and we zap that habit out? Go, stop.
So who's the best, or who do you like to listen to, Rob, in terms of announcers? Then,
oh gosh, on the radio guys, I'd have to look at. There are a few teams. Well, so here's the San Francisco Giants broadcast teams, both TV and radio, are simply outstanding. Mm-hmm. John Miller is, in my opinion, the greatest announcer working and has been for many years. But all the other guys that he works with are also very good. Aaron Goldsmith with the Mariners is outstanding. There are a lot of radio guys whose names I don't even know. I just turn the game on and I hear their voice and think, this guy's pretty good. I can't keep track of however many it would be, 60 or 80 of them. But the A's guys are really good. I'm probably biased toward the West Coast teams because I listen to more of their games. Most of the play-by-play guys are actually quite good. Probably half or more of the analysts, or what we used to call the color guys, are just old players saying old player things and not making a whole hell of a lot of sense. But there are some good ones.
Oral is really good. Oral Hershiser will say things that you just cannot find anywhere else. Like he'll talk about how a left-handed pitcher's landing leg will be more developed, muscular likewise, and talk about mechanics and things that or he'll say there's something going on with this pitcher and he'll identify it. And it's things that maybe you intuit as you see it, but he's 10 pitches ahead of you. Like this guy's missing with the location. It might be time to get him out. And you'll hear him say these things ahead of time. And it's really remarkable. So the insight from him.
He's on TV, right, Pete?
Yeah, he does TV games.
Yeah,
I Hughes, by the way,
completely missed him because he doesn't do radio, and I don't find the Dodgers radio broadcasts all that scintillating.
It's not good. It's not.
Again, I don't want to name any names, but
it's legacy.
People know. Legacy. Yes.
I think you have to be a big Yankee fan to listen to the Yankee broadcast. I love it, but I don't see how anybody that's not a Yankee fan could listen to those.
So here's the one thing I want. the MLB at Bat app, Jim, I think is unbelievable. It's the best thing that's literally ever happened to baseball fans. Having said that, the one change I would make is that after however many years it is now, 4 or 5 years, the app still has not figured out that when I click on a Yankees game, I want to listen to the other radio broadcast and not the Yankees broadcast.
I think you can. You can't do that because
you cannot set that preference. They don't always give me the Yankees. It seems to be one or the other. I don't know which one they pick, but how they decide which one to pick. But if I turn that game on and I hear one of those two voices, you know who I'm talking about. I cannot hit that other button, that other broadcast team button fast enough. And the app should know that by now.
Yeah, you would think the app could learn that.
The app could learn who I do and don't like. Yes,
but you know what I like though about the MLB TV things to kind of move over a little bit. Some of the condensed games are put together like incredibly well. Mm-hmm. Some of them are, you can see, well, this guy was up really late putting this one together, but a lot of them are like crafted, and they have the entire game and a little bit of drama and color and everything else in 5 minutes. It's a great way to catch up.
The MLB app is incredible. My one pet peeve is that the stupid LA Dodger TV right thing keeps so that I have no reason to get the app because I'm locked out. Like, just charge me an extra $10, whatever it is, and let me see the games, but we can't do that. I wanted to ask, the last really weird season I can think of, the Dodgers won as well. It was the 81 season where you had the Reds with the best record in the NL West, don't even make the playoffs, and you had the split season. I mean, that's about as crazy as it gets. There's not an asterisk on that season. Is there an asterisk for 2020? And how does it compare to that super weird 81 season? I mean, 104 games, I think it was, versus 60.
Man, that's a Rob question. Teed
you
up there.
I don't know about that, but I mean, the problem with the asterisk question, and I've heard it many times, is that most people think of those want a binary answer. Right. Yes, it's legitimate. No, it's not. And for me, those sorts of things, those sorts of answers are always somewhere in the middle. But I think that if I had to lean one way or the other, if you have a champion at the end of the season, it's quite legitimate. I mean, you can tell me that there have been whole books written about the Dodgers and the 81 season. And there are all sorts of legends about that, especially with Fernando having the great season. And I think the same thing will be true of this year. There will be books written about this season, and in part because it was such a crazy season and you have a pandemic, and that's part of the storyline. But ultimately, if the season hadn't finished, which I thought was a real possibility when they unveiled all these plans, sure, I thought, I appreciate the effort here. I don't know if this is going to work, you guys. And I got to say, I still don't know if it was a good idea, but I'm incredibly impressed with all the people at MLB who somehow figured out a way to make this work, and not do it in a bubble like the NBA did. But the fact that they were able to play a set schedule, I believe ultimately basically everybody played all the games they were supposed to play, even the teams that had to miss a week. And then we got to a World Series and ultimately, as we talked about before, maybe the best team in baseball actually won the thing. So absolutely, I think that we're going to remember this as a strange but highly legitimate season, which is what I would say about 81.
Rob, Jim, any asterisk for you for 2020?
No, I think, the truth is there's asterisks on every season. Every season, has its own challenges and differences. Obviously, this one's going to stand out. I think baseball, I'm sure, hopefully, will still be being played a century from now, 100 years from now. And as Rob says, there'll be books on it and people will talk about it. In terms of an asterisk, I don't think so. It's going to have an impact though on several players' careers in terms of career numbers, and those sorts of things. And I guess the question is how that will be taken into account, when it comes to, say, the Hall of Fame or that. Well, it gives that's the great thing about baseball. Everybody needs something to argue about, and this will be something else to argue about, I guess.
Can we officially call it when you slide into the base at the same time as the ball and you get pulled off the base by a fielder? Can we call that getting Herbecked now that it's happened more than once in the World Series?
I think it should. Yeah, that should have been the obvious. Now, did they have I feel like that happened a few years ago in a game, and they actually had the video clip queued up, and it was ready to go.
Yeah, I think you're right. I just can't remember what it was. I also know that when
they blow the call every time.
Yeah, I also know that when Max Muncy slides into a base, if you were in his way, you're going to take the worst of it. He knocked the catch, and this is like with protecting the catcher. He knocked the catcher back about 10 feet, and that guy just brings a lot of energy with him when he slides into the base.
Mm-hmm.
What other questions do you guys have as we kind of hit the end here?
Well, I actually, am kind of interested in Rob, whether your perspective has changed any in being commissioner and, in kind of an executive role, if you view the game differently, or maybe there's some other way that, it's changed.
Well, I think that I would say yes. And I could give a long, detailed, probably convoluted answer. I will say what it's given me a real appreciation for is, I've read books about commissioners and about ownership and various, historical things, but obviously you don't really get a feel for what that's like until you're doing it. And I try to sound humble when I say humble isn't the right word. I don't want to sort of, when I talk about this, I have to be careful to not sound like I'm Rob Manfred, because I know that I'm not and wouldn't want to be and couldn't be. Having said that, every single team, I don't care what league you're talking about, every single owner or ownership group has a different personality. So for me, the most interesting thing about the job has been managing relationships, mostly my relationship with other people, which I've never had to do. I've always been a guy who just hung out in a cool room with a bunch of baseball books and wrote stuff, right? And all of a sudden I was put in this position of, my dog's knocking things over for some reason. He gets scared. I'm not sure what he's scared of, but all of a sudden you have to learn how to talk to all sorts of different people. And I guess what I'm trying to get at is that people who haven't worked in baseball might think that owners are all sort of the same type of people. Well, they're not really. They all tend to have money. Not so much in a league like mine necessarily, although, one of our teams is owned by the same person who owns the Seattle Mariners. So yeah, there is money, but it's not uniformly like that. But everybody is completely different. I could, we have 15 teams and 12 ownership groups. And if I gave you descriptions of all 12 ownership groups, you would probably be shocked at how distinct everyone is. And I'm sure that it's the same way in basically every sports league. People get to that point where they can own a sports team all sorts of different ways, with all sorts of different personalities. So that's been the interesting thing for me, is just learning what goes into managing all those relationships. And it's been a lot of fun. I mean, when you're entering your 50s, you don't think you're going to wind up getting to have an experience unlike anything you've ever had before. So that part's been really great.
You got any questions for us, Rob? We peppered you for an hour.
Well, I think one of the things that I've been asking people this season is how you experienced the 2020 season, if it was different than past seasons, if you had a different approach going in, for me, it wound up feeling much like a normal season, because I wound up experiencing it the same way I normally did. And it was, I pretty much didn't think about anything terrible when I was listening to games on my phone, which was a nice valve of release. But I'm curious about how other people experienced it.
It was very different for me. I usually I go to a lot of Yankee games, and not going in person. So I ended up not watching. I would say I watched less games, proportionately this year even than in years past. I would watch the highlights, and sometimes the next morning would say, okay, well, let me see the box score. Where were the innings that the Yankees scored a lot of runs, or where did they blow the game, and kind of select those, replaying the game. But I really missed. I absolutely missed not being at the ballpark. Totally missed that.
Pete?
I don't get to watch Dodger games because I don't have the right cable provider, and so I often follow via just the most basic update app that they have. And also because of that, I don't get to watch a lot of other games. Like I might watch some A's games or Yankees games, but I probably paid more attention. I kind of see the baseball season as a 3-act play, and I sort of missed the first act of the spring training and getting the team sorted out. I really like that part of the season when you're trying to see, like, I don't know, just what do we have here? Because it kind of had taken me a minute to get caught up with what was going on. But I enjoyed the extra playoff rounds. I thought that was. I like the randomness of what could happen when it only takes 2 wins, and the fickle nature of playoff odds and how it's almost just a coin flip. I really like that part of it. So I guess my answer ultimately is it was interesting enough that if they wanted to do another weird season in another 10 years or whatever, just to play with the format, I'd be all right with that. Just to spice it up a little bit, like every 4 years or every 5 years, we're going to do this alternate format.
But without a virus, though, right? We'll just
yeah,
do it.
We can skip the virus part.
Yeah.
And I will say this too: more and more as I get older, I do not want the in-game personal experience because I can't. Rob, we've talked about this. I cannot get over the impression that someone's got their hand in my pocket the entire time. So I'll go to the new. I've not been to the new Yankee Stadium, so I'd absolutely go do that. And I would go with Jim because that's a different experience. But if it's me as a fan going to the Big A, which is just down the road from me, no, thank you. It's not enjoyable to me. They've taken all of that away. So maybe I'll go to a game every other year, but I've really lost that part of it unless there's some destination. Like I'll go to the new Ranger Stadium and see a game there. But the joy of being there is gone because of the cost of everything. It's just I don't like being ripped off.
No, I can empathize. I'm okay with 1 or 2 Mariners games, which is my sort of semi-local team a year. And then when I'm traveling, I want to go to the ballpark if I'm in a new city or a different city. But no, I understand. It's $55, $60 for a pretty good seat and $13 for a beer. Maybe I know it's a sign of my age, but it's sort of offensive to me.
Yeah. If I can't go buy a round of drinks for less than $75, oh, come on. Right. You don't want me to come, Yep. And then, by the way, you hit me for $30 for parking too. It's
well, if you come with me, Pete, you don't have to spend $75 on a round of drinks. 65. That's that'll do it.
Well, I do want to come see a game, and I've never been to the Mariners Stadium, Rob. So maybe we'll take a road trip up north, and you'll go up there with me. I've never been to a game there.
It's a really fun. It's one of my favorite. Being objective about it, I think it's one of the better modern ballparks.
Yeah,
and I love Dodger Stadium. By the way, that is an absolute gem, and I will pay anything to go to Dodger Stadium.
And it's gotten better, Yep. DJ Severe has an all-new sound system to do. Mm-hmm. He's already considered the best DJ. This is by the players. They text him. They're like, "Hey, I got your number from so and so. Love what you do. Can you play it?" And they gave him a world-class sound system. So it really is a gem. I have one more question for you guys. I don't know if you have a quick answer, but we just broke a 30-plus year World Series drought with the Dodgers winning. There's several teams that have never won, several teams that are more than 30 years. What's the next long World Series drought to break?
Well, the longest one I can think of is the Indians, right? That would be the longest, among the teams that have actually won one at some point. I would love to see the Indians come out with a new team name year one and win the World Series. I think that would be a really cool thing to happen and sort of legitimize, because they're going to rebrand at some point. We know that, right? It's just a matter of when. And they've been competitive for a long time. They just haven't gotten lucky in October, but that's the most likely one to happen. Off the top of my head, the Padres, right? Maybe that's the better answer, the more interesting answer.
Yeah.
Well, probably. Being a Yankee fan, it feels like we haven't had a World Series in centuries and centuries.
Yep.
But
Red Sox fans are hurting.
Absolutely, it's tough. But I agree with the Padres. The team. we were talking. We haven't really talked about the Marlins. I thought that the Marlins may be a very interesting team next year. So maybe maybe they're due too. Not next year. We'll let the Yankees win a couple in a row, and
Sure.
Then we'll throw a Seattle in there. And, all right,
Seattle.
the Dodgers.
The Mariners are probably number one on the list of teams that. Well, I mean, the Padres are number one because they haven't won ever, right? 69. They're the only team left from 69 that hasn't won. Well, no, the Rangers also.
They have not won.
won.
Yeah, they tried.
They go back farther if you count
really.
the
Oh, okay. Oh, well, then in that case, they have to be pulling for the Rangers.
Yeah. And then to help New York out, the Mets their championship is pretty stale now. So
That's
they
true.
can
That's
on the
true.
list.
Yep.
They get a lot of extra love though. Like Pete Alonso's a great player and everything, but it's just like they instantly compete. They're sort of like a college football team that's always overrated. And I'm not against the Mets at all, but they just seem to get a lot of excitement. Like, what is the there's got no one to play catcher or whatever it is. Anyhow, I want to talk positively about people today. Anything else you guys want to talk about? I'm good to go, or we can just call it.
I'm good.
Well, let's see what Rob's got to be working on a new book.
Oh yeah, good question.
So we can.
I am working on a new book. It's very kind of you to mention that, Jim. Unfortunately, we're like literally a day or hours from being able to say anything publicly about it.
All right. Keep everybody on tenterhooks.
Very soon.
Have to have them back.
It will be, I think, in this week. I think we will be able to make a public announcement. I'm really excited about it, and that's what I'll be doing all this winter.
Great.
When
baseball.
That'll break
still in baseball or sports.
Yep. Nobody will
even say that.
Unfortunately, no one will pay me to write about anything besides baseball. But no, it's going to be a baseball book. I'll give you a hint. It's not really a hint, but I will reveal that it is I'm working with someone else on their memoir. I've always wanted to get into that line of work and see if I could do it, and I'm going to try.
Great.
Is it Judy Babbitt?
Yes. Dang it!
The story's out. Breaking news. Jim, what are you working on?
Well, actually, I'm working on a memoir with someone. It's about someone who was a reserve Marine in Iraq, and we kind of talk about his company, what they went through, and so it's a lot about the war and a lot about what happens to people afterwards. Have never talked a lot about. About post-traumatic syndrome, and so we are doing a lot of that. So it's working with somebody on that kind of book. A collaboration it's always interesting. You always learn something. You learn something every day when you're talking to the person. So good luck with yours, Rob.
Thanks, you too.
And as soon as you guys are ready, come on the show and we'll talk about your new projects.
You'll have to have the real author of the book on the show. He's much better at storytelling than I am, but I would obviously love to come on anytime, Pete.
Yeah, for sure. And the Jim, same thing for you. Glad to have you and the Marine on the show. You guys are ready to go.
And I guess it's going to cost me a game at Yankee Stadium, huh? But you have to buy the drinks.
Yeah, I can't afford it. Wait, $65 a round? I'm going to start saving right now.
I think you can get away cheaper.